Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. We're continuing our discussion here on the 5 or 6 soil health principles that there are. And kind of thought we'd start today off with talking about the least amount of soil disturbance.
Yeah, and that's something I think disturbance takes on, a multitude of different avenues, or we can see disturbance through um, traditional methods, and then those that maybe we don't consider being soil disturbance. And I did pull up, NRCS kind of classifies soil disturbance into three primary categories. So I'm going to bring them up, and then Tom, you feel free to tell me what your thought is on those, or what maybe you've seen on your own farm that would classify as that. And so, the first one of the three, and as a reminder, we're trying to minimize these disturbance occasions to improve soil quality. Um, but biological disturbance. So when you're thinking biological disturbance, what's the first thing that comes to mind that you don't have an issue with the way that you're grazing?
Well, I think of biological disturbance. The first thing I think of is plowing.
So that would be physical disturbance.
Yeah, but that really destroys your biology.
It does. And I think, well, maybe I'll
You,
just give you three here. So biological disturbance, chemical disturbance, and then physical disturbance. And I
okay.
think you can make an argument for, like, where you're coming at it is we're seeing disturbance of the biology.
Hmm.
Where they're coming at it from is what's causing the disturbance. And so biological disturbance, those disturbance caused by biological entities. So grazing livestock,
Yep.
overgrazing
Yep.
would be a form of biological disturbance. And we've harped on overgrazing and continuous grazing situations. Yeah, it's something that limits the plant from functioning and doing what we need it to do
Hmm.
when it's always in this state of trying to survive, as opposed to trying to thrive um, in the environment. So, I mean, like I had mentioned, give you credit for the way you're grazing now. You don't have a lot of overgrazing situations, but are there other? I guess are there other areas, and there's a specific example that we were talking about the other day, that you noticed caused by your sheep around that water trough out there after the rain.
Oh yeah, it was. We got a good bit of rain. I went out to move sheep that afternoon, and all around our mineral sled, it was pretty muddy, and there were little sheep hoof prints everywhere. And my first thought was, "Thank God I don't have cows anymore,
Right, right, right.
or you'd never be able to walk over this again without twisting an ankle."
And I think you had mentioned, like, if I had cows, it would have been a foot deep.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
it's just the way it is.
yeah, and so right there was soil disturbance that we should not have had. It was in
Right.
it was in a bit of a low spot where water tends to pool if you get too much of it. Um, but it was just those pastures were just wet everywhere. So that's part of your soil disturbance. And that's there was I think it was last winter. There was a couple of days there where I didn't back fence or I didn't move my yeah, I just took my front fence out and just kind of moved them ahead. So they were kind of in the same paddock for 3 or 4 days at a time. So we just keep moving or just keep taking that front fence out and leaving the back fence where it was. And I thought I was going to be okay with that. And then we still had hay wagons out. that we used for shade and just kind of a little bit of shelter. When I pulled those wagons ahead, it was pretty chewed up under where those wagons had been. And right away I said, this isn't going to work. I might could get away with 2 days, but I couldn't go 3 or 4 like I had. And so we created more soil disturbance than we really wanted to do there.
Right.
So
In in your daily moves, do you notice, I mean, everything's kind of tight, but your
mm,
water's in one location. Do you notice the development of sheep paths? You know, a place where all of those sheep follow one another to water, to shade, or is it a tight enough area with those daily moves that you're not seeing a path being developed by that uh, trailing, follow the leader behavior?
no, we don't. With the area as tight as we're using, sheep don't really follow each other to water. They just kind of meander over one or two at a time and get a drink and meander back to grazing. That was a huge change. But we had cows. We had a at one time we would graze all the way across those pastures, but we'd leave the water in one spot and
Mm,
we would get the paths. You'd see the paths because all the cows would come to drink. Because it was far enough away, they all wanted to be together. So once one started to go, the others all followed. And I think you'd run into that. You'd definitely run into that same situation with sheep. But with keeping it small enough like that, we don't get those paths.
yeah, I was just curious because I think that would be another,
Hmm.
form of a disturbance that creating some level of compaction um, via the grazing animal.
Yeah.
So that's why I was asking that. So our next item of disturbance would be chemical disturbance.
Yeah, your
And
sprays and your fertilizers and
correct. Yeah. So overuse of nutrient applications, um, your our pesticides,
yep.
covering a broad variety of um, both insecticide and herbicide. Um, yeah, how much? I know you've mentioned on here before, use of some pesticide application during that renovation process, um, but on a continual basis or a semi-regular basis, probably not a whole lot.
No, no. The only time we'll use a herbicide is if we're going to completely change a pasture, we're going to completely regenerate or rejuvenate that pasture. Um, and we quite often do soil disturbance at that point too. That's the one time we feel like we can go in there and kind of smooth things out, and so we're going in at that point and doing everything wrong, with the idea that we're going to do everything wrong once and we're never going to do it again. But yeah, a lot of people don't realize that fertilizer has an awful lot of salt in it, and it
Mm.
it kills stuff. It just kills your biology. Um, Not only that, it's your root system. Instead of growing down, it just starts growing up because it doesn't need to go down anymore. It's just going to go up and just take those easy nutrients.
Yeah, and grow probably more lateral
Right.
in function, as
Yeah,
opposed to
because your fertilizers are all closer, much closer to the surface. What those plants like to have, and
right,
that just destroys all your biology that you've spent a long time building down below.
right.
It, it's a major major problem.
Yeah, and I do think there's some areas, especially when we're thinking about annuals. Um, if we have some annual implementation and some pasture rotation, specifically warm season annuals,
Hmm.
it's going to be very difficult to produce the nitrogen requirements for a C4 like high output grass, something like a sorghum sedan or a grazing corn type species. We just need a lot. It's going to be very difficult to produce that with just the soil biology. And I do. I mean, that's where you kind of take a what path are you going to approach it from
Hmm.
uh, when we're looking at application of nutrients in certain forms versus maybe I don't need to grow the maybe I don't need to grow that much tonnage of material just to graze. Um, yeah, it's just tricky. I don't know that there's any one way to do it. We've talked before on here growing feed stuff, and I think there's when we're talking about C4 grasses, if I wanted to produce corn silage, I want to produce 15 to 20 ton an
Yep.
acre
Yep.
because that means I'm only using 10 acres to feed my sheep for 5 months. And so uh, if I can do the things that we're not outlining in this, maybe it has a negative light on it, or we're not accomplishing or feeding the soil biology to the level we want to, um, but we are still doing as much as we can if it's positive. We're still getting a cover crop out there. We're promoting soil or plant diversity. Um, it's just going to be hard to make up in a limited acreage situation, make up the amount of feed we can produce with commercial fertilizer in that setting.
Hmm.
So that's just one example. Like that's you've got to. I don't know that you have to draw a line. Um, you've just got to figure out what's going to work for you in your livestock enterprise.
Well, I think this is where you stumbled into context,
Yeah.
which is one of the
Yep.
soil health principles.
Yep.
And you really have to look at your context, and that involves everything. That's, history of your farm, um, your financial situation,
Which
uh,
is huge. That's a
which is
huge
huge.
aspect of
Yeah.
it.
Your, as well as your, the amount of rainfall you get, um, the amount of time that you have. Um, you know, I, I do some consulting, and I'll go to a producer's farm, and right away, my first thought is, well, you need to be moving these animals every day. And it's hard for me to stop and say, this guy leaves in the morning for work and it's dark. And by the time he gets home in the evening, it's dark. When is he going to have time to go move fence?
Right.
And it's part of that context. And I always have to stop and think about that because I am that moving animals every day is so ingrained in my head. But in that situation, we try to work with the guy and try to get him set up to where he can at least move once a week, and maybe on that weekend he moves every day. But it's all part of that context. It has to be what works for you, and
Right.
you can't, even if the guy only works till 4 o'clock, and maybe he leaves for work at 4 a.m. and gets home at 4. Part of
Right.
that context is, are you still able to do this, not just physically but mentally as well? You're just exhausted, kind of a thing.
Right.
So this is all part of that context. You really have to sit down and see what will work for you, and especially when you look at the financial side of it as well. I know
And I think there
Penn State's always great for coming here and telling me, "Oh, we need to pull soil samples, and then we need to spend $1 million to get this soil all up to optimal levels." And I was thinking, "Oh, well, that's great." It gets back to that. How do you make $1 million in farming when you start off with 2 million,
right.
and, and you quit when you get down to the 1 million?
Right. And I think what you had mentioned, we were talking about other grazers, and I think sometimes the rhetoric is guilt. If you're not
Yeah.
moving every day, if you're not doing this, if you're not doing that, it directly impacts your soil health, and so you should feel guilty and you're not doing things the right way. And I think the context aspect of it uh, dealt with a lot of that outlined just what you said. Is I leave for work when it's dark, I get back when it's dark. I enjoy livestock, but those that have heard that conversation and maybe feel guilty about the not implementing these things to the highest degree, uh, are killing themselves, moving animals and after hours in the dark,
Mm,
and quality of life is
right.
decreased.
Yeah.
And then I would say the same thing if we've mentioned on here, enjoy going to these in-person educational events, and my hope would be that you wouldn't allow a daily graze to get in the way of you going and learning about another, yeah, at an educational event if you were gone for 2 days.
Yeah,
um
exactly. I'm going to, be speaking at the Ohio Grazing Conference, and I'll be gone for, I think, 3 days. But I'll move sheep before I leave, and then, but I'm going to give them a paddock big enough for 2 days,
right,
and they're going to be in that paddock for 2 days, and then on the day I get back, then I'll move them, and we'll go back to their, our 1 day graze.
right.
Um,
And my hope is you don't feel
CJ, my right
bad.
hand man, he'll come in the evening. It'll be dark, and he'll go up and he'll just check on the water and make sure they're where they're supposed to be. But
Right.
he's not going to be moving fence or anything like that. So he'll be out there with a flashlight.
Yep.
Hopefully it's not
Exactly.
cold and the wind's blowing, because it's always so much colder at night, when that wind's blowing.
Right.
It's during the day, but maybe go up with a hammer and break the ice off the water, kind of a deal.
Yeah. And my
I'll
hope is
I'll
you can
stick a couple
go.
extra tubs. I'll stick a couple extra tubs out there with water in it, so we're sure they're not going to run out of water.
Right. I think that's just one example. Like, I feel like you should be able to go and do that
Hmm.
and not come home and be beside yourself like, I can't believe that I let them graze in this one area for 2 days.
Yeah,
Like, because I think for a lot of people, that's how, when we're talking about rotations and moving sheep and um, soil health, like it can be an emotional topic for
yeah,
whatever reason.
yeah.
It's something that people are very passionate about.
Hmm.
And I think there's more to it than I think it should always be about improving. Yeah, I don't care if it's a baby step or if you're making a
Yeah,
leap in that. And I think it ties directly to your point, back to context. If I'm trying to produce 1,000 head of ewes on 10 acres, my production model is going to need to be very different than producing 100 ewes on 100 acres.
yep.
It's just going to be different.
Oh
Um,
yeah, and if you look too at just your rainfall, an arid environment, versus the type of environment we're in. I hope nobody ever calls me to come out west to tell them how to graze, because I I wouldn't have a clue.
well, honestly, the Western guys are probably closer to that 100 ewes on 100 acres model
Yeah,
because it's you having some discussions with some of those range grazing individuals. Most of that grass, if it gets grazed when they're moving through, will not be grazed until the following year.
yeah.
So we're talking about a single pass grazing event. A lot of
Hmm.
that has to do with water. A lot of it has to do with just the expanse and the extensive nature of the systems.
Yeah,
Whereas like Ohio, Pennsylvania, we get into Iowa where we're looking at some confinement operations.
yep,
I think we still have to look at soil health because our feed's coming from
yeah,
somewhere.
yeah.
Uh, but is it as big of a deal as when we have sheep out on pasture? It depends if we're producing that feed ourselves or
Hmm.
buying it in. But again, it's all context. Our other aspect of uh, soil health principle, or our last one that we're going to talk about, is animal impact.
Yep,
And I think we've already talked about it with context. With context, uh, we're grazing animals. We're
yep.
going to have animal impact. We can also have negative animal impact. But what do you feel the positive animal impact is specifically in your operation?
I think there's a lot to be said for just the hoof action. Um, we do an awful lot of trampling grass down, and I think that's it goes back to that soil armor, but you need animals to do that. And that's part of that animal impact. That animal impact is converting all those different nutrients that they've taken out of that plant. Now it's gone through a rumen, and that's all been converted, and it comes back out the backside. And while it is basically the same nutrients, now those nutrients are in a different form that has made the nutrients available again to those plants. And
And
that's part of your animal impact.
and that aspect of it, in my opinion, is the greatest impact
Right.
of grazing livestock. The ability, like we're not doing anything to that plant um, in a beneficial setting. We're consuming leaf material and vegetative material. It's going through the body, and we're depositing it back out onto the soil in a usable form.
Hmm.
And that timeline for nutrient degradation and breakdown and usable forms is exponentially increased through the rumen, through the grazing animal,
Yep.
than it is even through trampling. You know,
Yep.
even through just letting that plant reach maturity, reach those reproductive phases of growth, die off, leaves slough off, decay. That's a long process.
Yep.
And through that process, we can lose a significant portion of that nutrient component. Uh, but through the animal, it's almost immediate.
Yeah.
And we're putting, as long as we're getting it back into the places that we need to. And that's where, if we have some loafing areas, some shade, water, heavy use areas in that pasture, all we're doing then is removing, to the nutrient point, we're removing nutrients and displacing those nutrients somewhere else.
Yeah,
We're
you're moving the
trying,
nutrients from out in the grazing area over to the loafing part area.
correct. And we're trying to get away from that. We're trying to minimize that as
Yep.
much as possible.
Yep. And that's what comes back to kind of your daily moves, so they're not going back to one area and just, depositing all your minerals or all your nutrients right there.
Right.
Another part of this that I don't think people ever or think about very often is just insects.
Mm,
I had just a funny story. I've got some grandkids that live in Las Vegas,
okay.
and apparently there are no bugs in Las Vegas. I don't know. I've not been to Las
Really?
Vegas. They got scorpions and stuff that want to kill you, but just not many bugs.
It's because they're all going to the lights.
Apparently, maybe they're all in town. I don't know. But anyhow,
Right.
my grandkids were here, and we all jump in the truck and we drive up back, and we're standing there in the grass, and they are just going nuts because there are bugs everywhere, and the bugs are landing on their arms, landing on their legs because they were all in shorts, buzzing around their face. And those kids could not wait to get back to the house because of all the bugs.
Oh, they didn't like the bugs.
Oh, they hated the bugs.
Oh, that's so funny.
And I had never thought about this before. It just seemed amazing to me. Now my daughter was standing there and she's tolerating it, and and the kids are just going nuts. And so we ended up going back to the house. And a few months later, our county conservation officer was out, and we're walking through the fields, and his first thing he said was, "I can't believe how many insects are here. There are
Mm,
just thousands and thousands and thousands of insects." And I had just gotten used to it,
right. Right.
but so many times in our cropping situations, boy, if you had that many insects out there, they'd
Kill
be right
them.
out there with a pesticide.
Yep. Kill them all.
Kill them
That,
all.
yep.
And for every bad insect that you have, there's 1,700 other good ones. I've heard this statement more than once. Beneficial insects,
Hmm.
and we don't have an issue with with insects coming in and destroying plants, I think there's so many other insects there that it keeps itself all balanced out. We've got spiders out through fields. It's just insane. And
That's where I draw the line.
spiders like to
No,
eat it. Well, I don't pick
right,
them up and cuddle with them, but
right,
you know, you know,
right.
and just like anybody else, I hate walking through a spider web. You get a spider web across your face, and that always amazes me. I'll be walking along, and all of a sudden I hit the spider web.
In the middle of the field.
Yeah,
Yep.
you can feel it, and you start looking around, and you think, where in the world was this thing at? Was it just blowing in the breeze? What was the deal? But yeah, and I don't know that there's been much research done at all on the benefits of insects, other than, we talk about our pollinators quite a bit. Um, but I could just imagine that down in there's a massive war going on with
Oh
all
yeah.
with all these different insects.
Yeah. It's like
Uh,
watching the movie Bug's Life. That's all based on real factual events that
yeah,
occur on a daily basis.
I don't think I've seen that. I'll have to watch that.
It's a good one. It's a classic Disney movie for you.
There
But
you
we'll
go.
see if anybody else knows what I'm talking about, or maybe I'm the only one that watches animated films. I at least have an excuse because I have young kids now. But I think that's a great point, and I think one of the best things, like one of the things I love to see out in the field is um, like what we grew up calling cowbirds.
Yeah.
Like if I can get, yeah, I feel like I am watching Natural Geographic, not natural,
Mhm.
National Geographic, and David Attenborough's out there just talking about my life as a sheep grazer. And we see this, like just these cowbirds chilling on the back of a slicked out Katahdin ewe.
Yep.
To me, that is just one of the coolest things. Like to see these in just interactions of species that have no business being together. Like other than the bugs that bird is consuming, the sheep doesn't care.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so neat to see. And likewise, you go out to bush hog or you're mowing hay, and the number of barn swallows.
Oh yeah.
You'll have 50 barn swallows out there just zipping around.
When we
Uh,
when we get into the tall grass grazing, every time I move sheep, I don't know where these barn swallows come from, but all of a sudden they just swarm in. And as those sheep are moving through that taller grass, they've got to just be kicking up all these insects because these barn swallows are just swooping all over the place. I've
and
tried catching them. I've tried catching videos on my iPhone, and you just can't see the birds on
right.
my iPhone. But it is the coolest thing to watch these birds just zip all through there. But that's
And
another
I
thing. People come to my place and they just go on and on and on about all the birds that are here. I know I go to my neighbors. I was standing in his yard, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, where are all his birds?
they're at your place.
Apparently, there were like
Yeah.
there were like no birds. I go to a lot of places and I start looking around. I'm like, I see a few birds, but not like, just scads of them. In my place, there are birds all over the place all the time. It's amazing how many birds are here. And there's birds that I've never seen before. I don't know what they are. I'd love to get some bird watcher to come in and tell me what kind of birds are here because I see birds sitting on. They'll be sitting on top of a plant. They'll be sitting on a post, and again, I try to get my phone out, try to get a picture of them. I can't get close enough to them to get a good picture of them, but
Right. Yeah. Need
so, and
somebody to come out and
I think this
categorize
all plays.
everything.
I think this all plays into animal impact.
Oh yeah, and it's a total. You have to think of it as a total ecosystem
Yeah,
that that you're generating. Um, and now with the guard dog, maybe negatively impacting the rodent population in your
yeah,
in your pasture. But you're exactly right. It's a full blown approach, and I don't necessarily. I, this is where people may have some differing opinions than what I have, but I'm not raising sheep for the rest of the ecosystem that we're grazing in. I'm raising sheep to raise sheep.
Yeah.
However, I feel that I have to at least be cognizant of the ecosystem and my soil health that I'm impacting, because I think that in my opinion, and kind of where you stemmed on all of this and the interest, is I think they go together very nicely. And
Hmm.
the positive things that I impact soil with livestock, that I bring to the table with livestock, and then the things that I'm my management that contributes to soil health directly relates to improving the environment for my livestock. And so I think it's important. For me, I'm a sheep guy, so
Yeah.
that's what gets me probably more excited. But when I can find something else that directly, or maybe even indirectly, benefits the flock
Yeah.
and improves performance, I think it's worth pursuing.
Yeah. I think to me, it truly is a symbiotic relationship.
It has to be.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like I said, as I started delving more and more into this, it just made sense to me that this is beneficial on both sides. And so
And you
you,
don't have it has to be that symbiotic relationship because, as we had mentioned, and I think we highlighted in a previous episode, without the grazing livestock, we have overgrown areas of land.
yep,
Without the land contributing, plant diversity and forage, we don't have livestock.
yep,
And so it's this kind of positive tug of war, trying to enact positive change um, in our grazing situations. And I think that's something we will just wrestle with and improve upon, as we should be trying to improve upon both aspects
yep. But
throughout our
I
time
think,
raising animals.
yeah, I think it goes hand in hand. So it's been a good discussion. We're running up on our time here. And so we thank you for listening to another episode of the Grazing Sheep podcast. If you want to reach out to us, you can do that by contacting me at bigtomperkins@gmail.com. There's a Facebook page. You can go on there and like and follow, and you can leave some comments there as well. So it's been good catching up with you there, Cam. I think it was a good discussion. And
It was, for those that are tired of hearing about dirt. We'll get
yep,
back to talking talking about sheep. But I think there's a lot of aspects of both areas that contribute to the health of each other.
I think so. So, all right, buddy, you have a good week.
You too, Tom.
All right, we'll talk to you later. Bye.